I'm Aaron Graber with Ventrac, and in this video, we're doing a side-by-side comparison between the Ventrac SSV and the Ariens Mammoth. These are two sidewalk snow machines aimed at the same customer type, and we're going to talk all about how they're put together and what you might want to know if you're in the market for something like this. This is going to be a really fun video to shoot. However, it might get a little long and it's going to be fairly technical. So if all you want is my conclusion, I'll spare you all the details and you can stop watching right here. The Ariens Mammoth is a cool machine with a couple really nice features. But those features come at the expense of making it less contractor grade and less suitable for living with day after day in a hard commercial setting than the Ventrac SSV. We have several years behind us now using the SSV to support contractors in a commercial setting. And it's proven to be a valuable asset to those fleets. That's exactly what we'll talk about as we get into this video. So both of these machines are very similar. They're compact machines. They're meant to go on sidewalk areas and transitional areas where you can't get bigger equipment like ATVs, UTVs, or trucks. They run a hydraulic system that has independent wheel motors on each corner of the machine, so a lot of power and a lot of traction. They're also stand-on machines, so the operator stands behind the platform and controls them with drive levers up on the dashboard. They also have very similar attachment options. We'll get into that part of the video later, but generally speaking, they offer all of the basic snow removal tools that you'll need. The first difference you're going to notice is that the Ariens machine has a 28 horsepower Kawasaki engine, and the Ventrac has a 23 horsepower Vanguard engine. And that's the big difference. Obviously, they have a 5 horsepower advantage over us, and the price difference is there too. So their machine, at the time of shooting this video, retails for $14,999. Our machine, $16,200. So our machine costs $1,200 more and it has 5 horsepower less. What gives? It can be cheaper than the Ariens unit by about $150 if you don't add on the additional PTO kit. So the previous price that I mentioned of $16,200 includes a PTO and weight transfer kit factory installed. And you need that PTO kit to run any of our PTO-driven attachments. We offer the machine without it though, so that you can get into the machine at a lower price point if all you're going to use is a straight blade or a V-blade. So without that kit, we're actually the cheaper unit. But it's not quite apples to apples because the Ariens unit comes with the PTO kit installed. You don't have the option of buying it without. It's also worth mentioning that for that additional cost, you're also getting the weight transfer kit factory installed, and that's something the Ariens unit doesn't have at all. Another thing to address is the obvious visible difference between these two machines just sitting here. This machine is much lower, the engine is right there in front of you, and the SSV has it tucked in. Now, if I'm an operator and I stand on this machine, here I am operating the Mammoth, I can just reach down and grab the engine. If I was strong enough, I could just pick it right out. Even though it's very unlikely that someone's going to be operating this and just, driving along and, oh, it's sputtering, I wonder what's going on. Maybe I just take a look down here, or, oh, I hit a hole and now I fling forward a little bit. The fact that I can reach in here and just put my hands, my face all in front of this thing, it's not something I would be comfortable with putting operators on. If you step over to the SSV, it's obviously very different. I can't reach around the machine into the engine. There's guarding here. It's shielded from the elements. The noise is shielded from me. The engine is tucked up inside, so I don't really have direct access to it. I'm not going to fall into the engine. And I'm not suggesting that that's a common occurrence, that somebody's going to fall over the front of this thing, but it's just something to think about. Now let's talk about available accessories that can come with these two power units. The Mammoth has a 20-gallon brine system available, as well as a 2 cubic foot drop spreader. This blue cap is the brine tank. That comes with every machine. But you are still required to buy the brine kit that includes all the piping, the nozzles, the control system, all of that stuff to run the brine system. With the drop spreader, it mounts behind the operator on the Ariens unit. And putting that several feet behind the operator makes sure that this machine is much longer than the SSV, and the Ventrac SSV is about 4 to 5 inches shorter with the broom attachment on than the Ariens Mammoth. So once you add in the drop spreader, it's not even close, and you're going to have a much harder time maneuvering the Mammoth around those tight sidewalk areas, especially in spots where you have light poles, fence posts, anything that's in the way of those sidewalks. So to match those two accessories, the Ventrac has a drop spreader and a brine kit. The brine kit mounts the tank right here, and then the nozzles go down through the center of the machine, spray out behind the machine. So the drop spreader keeps that weight centered and low in the machine, providing extra traction right where you need it, and there's nothing extra hanging off the machine to the back to potentially crash into things. We also have a storage basket available for the SSV. So if you're not running the brine system, you can get an open storage basket that sits right here in that same space, which can fit 4 50-pound bags of salt. So looking at the power units broad spectrum, the first thing I want to talk about is lighting. The Mammoth has headlights that are way too low. I'll just be frank. They are so low that they're barely above the broom now. And that means under the right conditions, you may not even be able to lift the broom and see beyond yourself. So of course our front-facing work lights are standard on the machine, just like the Ariens unit, but we also offer rear-facing work lights that are the exact same units as these front ones. In addition to that lighting, we have rear tail lights available. We also have strobe lights for visibility, a backup alarm, and a horn kit. Another thing you'll notice, and you'll probably like about the Ariens unit, is that it has much bigger tires than we do. They're quite a bit taller, they're maybe a little bit wider, they got deeper tread pattern, and that could be kind of an advantage. So the one thing that I think of first is that you can climb curbs maybe a little bit easier because the approach angle to that curb is going to be less of a constraint, but the SSV climbs curbs pretty well. So turning the Ariens Mammoth when you're on dry pavement is much more difficult because you have a lot more sidewall on these tires. They flex more. So both of these are skid steer style machines. The moment you try to turn, that sidewall flexes and the machine fights that turn. So it's going to be okay when it's snowy and icy. It's obviously going to be better when the rubber is colder. But apples to apples in the same situation, when you get to a place where you're working on dry pavement, which happens a lot of time, especially if you're in pre-treat mode, this machine is a lot harder to actually maneuver and turn. The straight ahead tractive force of larger tires is an advantage. If all you had available to you on both of these machines was a straight blade, then we'd be having the conversation about which tire is better and probably giving them the nod. But that's not the case. We have other attachments. And when it gets deep, you're using a snowblower where traction isn't much of an issue anyway. We already talked about our drop spreader being in between the wheels and how much of an advantage that is. That is closed off to them until they redesign the machine entirely, change the chassis up, or go to smaller tires. To use the large tires that they chose, they have eliminated the possibility that they could ever use the middle of the machine for anything productive. And that's something that we really value in our SSV. Let's go back to the engine horsepower differences. We touched on it briefly in the beginning, but we're going to drill into it now. So 28 horsepower, 23 horsepower, we're 5 less. More is always better, right? Usually so. When you're talking about getting work done, I would generally agree that more horsepower is better, up until the point that it's wasted horsepower. The first thing to talk about is efficiency. So they are a PTO drive unit. All of their attachments are shaft-driven PTO. But to get the power to that shaft, they go from an electric clutch to a gearbox, then to another gearbox, because anything that's driven at the final drive has to have a gearbox to actually move the attachment. So it goes engine, PTO clutch, gearbox, shaft drive, another gearbox. We eliminate one of those steps. We go straight from PTO clutch to hydraulic system. That's it. They also run all of their attachments, all of the movements they make, the hitch arms, everything on the machine with electric actuators. So the electrical demands of the Mammoth are much higher than they are in the SSV. It takes power to create that electricity to move all those actuators. It also takes power to move hydraulics, but it's momentary. The power that you're consuming on this engine to spin that alternator and supply that whole system with enough juice to keep up with itself is always dragging that engine down. Let's assume that those efficiency losses aren't consequential at all. Let's say they're so small that it doesn't matter and you're still talking a roughly 5 horsepower difference. I know from using the SSV in the field that the amount of snow you're working with in a sidewalk is usually pretty low. The types of accounts that are willing to pay for good sidewalk service oftentimes require such frequent attention that you're never really addressing more than a few inches of snow at a time. So you're paying for power that a lot of times isn't even going to go to use. Before we put the horsepower debate to rest, I will give credit where credit's due. If you are in a blizzard with 2-foot deep snow, it's heavy, it's thick, it's hard to work through, and you're running a snowblower on both of these machines, the Mammoth will likely progress a little bit faster than we will. Is it enough to justify the differences in the machines that you have to live with otherwise? That's only a question that you, the contractor or consumer, can answer. For me, this is plenty of horsepower, and it has other advantages that I really like a lot. Another thing that you might notice about the Ariens unit that would be probably sold as an advantage is the flip-up platform in the back. Now, the advantage of that would be that you could theoretically walk behind the machine or flip the platform up for storage, and I would only give the storage advantage credit here. We have chosen to make our operator platform rigid to the machine. There's a sensor on the SSV that notices operator presence, and that plays into parking brake, PTO application, things like that. The SSV platform being fixed is a bit of a functional downgrade when you're talking about storage of the units. But you have to consider how often these units are going to be stored, how often they're going to be used, and in which situation does it matter more to you, which one is better. All right, we're going to keep going on the operator stations of these machines, so we'll stay here towards the back. And we're going to talk about the Ariens unit first. Where do I even start? This is a bit messy. They've done a couple things like you would expect, and a couple things are just so weird that I would never want to run this machine very long. The first thing is the heated hand grips are only on the drive levers, which is kind of bizarre because, as anyone knows, if you ran this machine, you would never do this. You would have almost no control of the machine. So you're going to have to anchor your hands on this front anchor or this rear anchor, and they obviously understand that because they have the bars there to anchor your hands on. But then most of your hand is off of the heated grip and on a cold metal surface. Next, we can talk about the key. I'm not the only person who mentioned this, so I know it's not just me. But whenever I want to turn this machine off, I have a hard time getting to the key because it's in this awkward place of between the drive lever and underneath this anchor. More importantly with the key though, this is not a weather sealed key, and the inlet for it is on a somewhat horizontal surface. And what that means is ice and water are going to collect inside that area, and this key is going to get frozen up, or if you take the key out, potentially you won't be able to insert the key. And that's something that is probably going to change, so we'll just say future Ariens probably won't have this issue, but today they do have this issue. The next thing I want to talk about is controlling the attachments. So here you are driving the machine along. This tiny little joystick down here is your control for the attachments. It's an electric joystick. You reach it by moving your thumb down while you put the drive levers forward. If you can tell, this is just a very awkward spot. This is your throttle. Nothing crazy there. PTO switch. Nothing to really report on that one. Grips your heat on and off. This switch over here is your single work light, but it is a tiny little light. Again, it's standard, so it's free, but it's very, very small, pretty ineffective, and you don't have any other lights back here. You have a single reflector, so no other visibility. The last control on this dash is the up and down rocker for the chute on the snowblower. Everything else is pretty standard. You also have an adjustment here where you can pull this pin and move the front anchor for your drive levers, and that caps your speed. Okay, now I'm going to go from the Mammoth operator platform to the SSV and talk about what we've got going on this one. First thing I'm going to address is the key, because I was a little mean to that one, but for good reason. As you can see, our key is shielded from the elements. It's also mounted on a vertical plane. That keeps all of the snow and ice away from the actual inlet to the key, keeps it from freezing up. Right next to that, standard on every SSV, is a USB charge point. I don't see one over there. I don't think it has it. Behind those two things is a cup holder. PTO over here. These are the mounts for your operator windscreen. I'll throw that on here in a second. This is your throttle. And then a lot of your controls are in this panel area here. If you have a drop spreader and brine control kit, those will go in this area here, so you have easy access to those. And then we can talk about our controls for the actual drive levers. So as you can see, we have heated grips on the SSV as well, except we have heated grips on the anchor points too. So when I'm driving forward, I have heat on the curls of my fingers and on my thumbs all at the same time. Our anchor point also moves, so you can adjust the speed that an operator is capped to. This is the control for the hydraulics that control the hitch arms and the attachment. And this is really important because it shows just how easy this is to access. You also have an anchor point or a rest for your wrist to lay on. It has a float position that is simple to access. Parking brake here on this side of the machine, very similar to where theirs is. I want to also point out the switch for the grips. They have an on-off switch, so you can turn your heat off. So the off position for our machine is the middle position on this switch. The reverse position is a low heat to the grips, and then the front position is a high heat. Also, as I stand here, I notice that the operator pad on the SSV is much nicer. It's a lot wider in the thigh area, and it's much softer too. This pad is also height adjustable. So I can take it from its position now, which is in the lowest position, up several inches if I need to, if I'm a taller operator yet, and gives you a little bit of flexibility. The pad easily comes off to access maintenance points behind the machine if you should need to do that. Before we abandon the operator platforms, I'm going to grab the windscreen for the SSV and install it. That'll show you how quickly it installs and where the profile fits on the machine, what kind of protection it provides for the operator. Okay, so as you can see, now I am behind the windscreen. It's a little bit tight in the studio here, but out in the real world, it's a matter of 10, 15 seconds and you're in. It does have a manual windshield wiper here. This is a hard plexi material, soft canvas sides, just in case you bump into anything so that you're not shattering any glass. Super awesome option here to keep operators more comfortable on a machine that otherwise can get kind of cold if you're in really harsh conditions. The final segment we want to talk about are attachments. The main difference in attachments is that all of the Mammoth attachments are powered by a shaft drive PTO, if they're PTO attachments. If it's a blade, there is no PTO, obviously. Same for us. Our attachments are all belt drive. And it's that first point that is the most important thing I want to talk about up front. Belt drive is incredibly easy to hook up compared to the shaft drive. The way they've got this set up, and I would assume it's probably the same on the snowblower, but it's possible it's different. There is a half shaft that connects to the PTO gearbox on the machine, and then that half shaft connects to the broom, and you can connect it without accessing the point on the gearbox that's on the machine. You could do it either way. So you could leave the half shaft on the broom and attach it at the knuckle at the gearbox, or you can attach it at the bottom of the machine and then nest those two pieces together. But as far as I can tell, no matter how you do it, it's a total pain to do. If you leave everything on the attachment and you connect it underneath the machine, you are literally crawling under the machine to attach it. The gearbox for the PTO is right here. So you have to crawl underneath to get to it, and it's a little bit difficult. Over here on the SSV, since we are belt drive, you have a belt and a pulley. The belt doesn't care where it goes onto the pulley. It doesn't care what area the pulley is turned to. None of that matters. All you're doing is sliding it on the pulley and adding tension. All of that happens right here at the front of the machine. The tension is right there at the front. The belt slides on the pulley. Literally, as I was describing it, I just took it from installed to loose, back to installed. It's truly that easy. On our side, we have one 12-volt plug and two hydraulic hoses. These are quick connects, flat face couplers, and this 12-volt electric plug is a 4-pin, very easy to understand, very easy to locate because it's got a prong here on the top. It only goes in one way. Super easy. On the Mammoth, everything is driven by this electric plug, and it has very tiny pins, maybe the size of a pinhead, and it doesn't take much to mess one of those up and completely render this thing useless in terms of connecting, because you have to have everything perfect to nest together. If one of these pins is off, one of these dozen or so pins, you're not going to be able to put this thing together, and then none of the function of this broom is going to work other than the PTO. When you turn the PTO on, you only have one motion for these bristles. So they sweep forward just the logical way that you would imagine if you're trying to move forward. But because it's a shaft drive PTO, that's your only option. We have the ability to isolate the broom rotation from the engine RPM and travel speed. So you can add this electric actuator here, and that strokes the hydraulic pump differently so that you can decide whether you want to barely turn the bristles of the broom or turn them as fast as possible. You also have the ability to stop it completely and reverse the turn of those bristles to do something like pulling directly up to a door and spin those bristles backwards, pulling the snow away from you. But I do want to highlight one thing here real quick. You'll notice a couple differences. This broom is way higher. Remember we talked about hopping curbs with big tires are better. Yeah, but if your attachment doesn't even go over the curb, well, now you have to drive backwards over it and then your attachment drags. I also want to do something else. That we're in a lab setting. I'm a professional presenter. Please take that into mind. So I'm going to come up, SSV. This is my whole body weight. Okay, this is a pretty heavy attachment, so it's pretty fair that it's kind of rocking the machine a little bit, right? That's some serious machine imbalance. These attachments were built to really mimic the capabilities of the machine and match together well with it. The machine has the ability to push the attachments through and remain stable, remain calm. The last thing I want to talk about here before we go on to the other attachments is the actual attachment plate. So a couple things that I noticed when putting this broom on the unit is that it didn't actually fit right away. One side latched in and the other side didn't, and I couldn't quite figure out why until I realized that the bottom plate of this attachment was maybe bent a little bit too far during manufacturing, so it wasn't totally nesting against itself. And then that right-hand latch was rubbing against the edge plate, so it was having a very hard time closing and opening. And what I realized is that you're relying on their attachment hookup being totally clean to actually nest together. So there's two flat plates, and they have to be exactly like this, and it's on a horizontal plane. If you have one pebble, one piece of ice, one clump of rock salt, anything like that in between those two plates, you're going to have a little bit of a gap, and those latches literally won't close at all. Since ours relies on more of a vertical nesting, there's two plates that slide together like this, and then there's a much larger void where the actual latch mechanism closes down onto. There's a lot more variance that can happen where these attachments still work and latch on properly, but can handle some environmental variance and still not have problems getting them connected. Okay, so that's a good start to the attachments. Let's take a look at all of the rest of them in our fleet and the other attachment that we have for the Mammoth unit. The last point of comparison between the SSV and the Mammoth are the rest of the attachments. Now, to be fair, I don't have the rest of the Mammoth attachments with me. All I have is the straight blade, so we can't do a direct comparison of everything. Maybe a future video can highlight some of those differences, but I'll do a brief overview of our attachments, and then the blade that I do have, I can talk about how those are head-to-head. This is our snowblower. It's an awesome unit, just blasts through the absolute worst blizzard conditions. Moving on to the straight blades, here we are. This is their one and only straight blade for the moment. This is our wider 54-inch blade. You'll see ours is a little bit wider, theirs is a little bit taller. It's got the same obvious issue with the hitch arm plate as I was talking about with the broom. This highlights it. This shows you this whole surface has to be perfectly clean and flat to nest exactly together with the power unit. So that's what I was talking about before. There maybe is a little less structure in terms of where the blade anchors to the hitch mechanism. It's only down here at the bottom. Ours pushes against the blade at the bottom and the top, so it helps spread that load across the entire height of the blade. Then moving on, you've got our V-blade and our snow bucket. The bucket is a very basic attachment. Again, it operates just like our power bucket on our larger tractor. The next and final attachment is our V-blade. You see this one here with the 6-inch optional extensions on both the left and right side. So you can get this attachment much narrower. It's a very narrow V-blade without this. This one also has the poly edges on it. What's really important about this V-blade though is the trip edge itself. It's a full moldboard trip. So as the V-blade trips, the entire unit trips forward. And the problem with that is all of the snow that it was carrying gets dumped behind it then. So really what's ideal is if you have just a trip edge. So you can see this horizontal line right here. That's the edge that trips backwards. But the difficulty with that on a V-blade is when you're in the V position, those two trip edges want to hit themselves and stop that trip from happening. So you typically have to have like a big cavern in the center here to absorb all of that movement. But then you're compromising on your finish quality and what the actual work getting done is. And we were able to get around that by having much less space here and a really great performing scrape to the V-blade so that when you actually have it in the V position, you can get down and cruise and have really nice results. And when it trips, it's a patented design that the trip edges hit each other, and as they hit each other, they translate out. So all of that movement and all of that force is absorbed in a trip edge that translates out and away from the blade as well. And again, that's a patented design, so it's totally unavailable to them. The only way you're going to be able to get this incredibly well-performing V-blade is to buy it on the Ventrac system. This is the storage bin. This is what I was talking about previously, having in that void on the machine so that you can carry extra bags of salt. And this is the brine tank. Just a reference point. This is where a brine tank would go if you got that kit. And then both of these tractors also actually have the drop spreader in between the wheels. So you can see the stainless drop spreader here in between the wheels on these units. And this is just showing how that nests together and how efficiently it uses that space. And the controls to run both of those things, this unit has the brine and the drop. So your drop spreader controls right here, variable speed on off, and then this is your pressure and your on off for your brine system, easily accessed by the operator. So that concludes all of my talking points on the Ventrac SSV versus the Ariens Mammoth. Of course there are things we missed, so we always want to encourage, if there's something specific that we didn't talk about and you have a question, make sure to leave it in the comments below. I'll see it and I'll answer it. The most important thing you can do to decide between one machine or the other is to go try them out. If you can, try them in a real storm. After demoing the machines and asking around, I think you'll be able to make a really good assessment on which one of these machines is right for you. For more information on our unit, please visit our website at ventrac.com. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch more videos of the SSV unit in action. And if you're interested in going upstream to a more capable machine yet, check out our 4520 tractor for all of the things it can do in snow and in other seasons as well. Thanks again for watching this video. I'll see you next time.